All right, Unit 4 is about release planning and managing releases. In this unit, we're going to talk about what release planning is and what it's for. You will be able to do basic release planning. We'll talk about the limitations of release planning, what it can and can't do, and what you can do about its limitations. We'll go through some tools for measuring progress. And finally, we'll talk about some prioritization tools and some other ways of making sure that you can get the things done that you need to get done. So, what is a release? Fundamentally, release planning is a medium-term planning process. It's what you use to plan out a month, 2 months, 3 months worth of work. And it's something that you'll do on a cadence. It is focused on outcomes, user outcomes, organizational outcomes, and it focuses on what you're doing and why you're doing it, not the how of how you'll actually implement it. That's up to the teams doing the work, not you or the release planning process. And the goal is not just to come up with a plan, it's also to create a shared understanding and alignment among all your key stakeholders as to what is going to be done. So a key prerequisite for release planning is to identify those stakeholders. For a product manager, that's going to include developers, potentially customer support, potentially IT operations. You have to identify all the people who need to work together in order to deliver your plan and work with them to build the plan. There are some very common misconceptions about releases, and I want to address those. First of all, the release planning process is not about making a commitment to ship a whole bunch of software on a particular date. As we saw in Nell Thomas's video that you watched for your last unit, what we should be doing is continuous delivery, which is shipping features all the time. It used to be we didn't do that. We would ship at the end of a multi-month process, and that software we shipped was called a release. And the point of the release planning process was to say what would be in that software. A lot of people still think of it that way. That's not what we should be doing. We're doing a medium range planning process. Ideally, we should be shipping software all the time. And at the end of that release planning process, it's just about what objectives we met or haven't met. But the software is a completely separate beast that should be deployed all the time, not once at the end of the release planning process. A lot of people think about release planning as building a backlog of features that we are committing ourselves to ship. Again, that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to set objectives that we all agree to, and what actually gets shipped is going to be decided by teams. When we do the release planning process, we have the least information we will ever have about what it is we're going to build. So we're not going to be prepared to actually specify what all those features are, especially not for a large complex project. Don't commit yourself as part of the release planning process to creating a backlog of features and then shipping it. You will disempower your team. You will not be able to take advantage of what you discover in the process of trying to meet those objectives. That's a very old-fashioned command and control way of doing software planning. A release is not a minimum viable product. We talked about what a minimum viable product is and is not in the last unit. We don't want to confuse those things. They are different things. An MVP is an experiment designed to test a hypothesis about our product. A release, in the sense of a software release, which, as we've said, is different from the release planning process, is something that we actually ship to users that people will actually use in real life. So that's not the same thing as an MVP, but you will still hear people say, what are we doing in this release? Oh, we're delivering the MVP. That's a misuse of the term that we should try and avoid because it's confusing. Finally, following on from the fact that a release is not about planning a big list of or backlog of features, it's also not a commitment to ship a list of features either. So when you do release planning at the end of it, you don't want to end up with a big list of features and some key stakeholder saying, okay, so you're going to ship that in 3 months' time, great. That's not what this is about. This is about getting aligned on the objectives that we're trying to achieve in the next 1, 2, 3 months, whatever the horizon of the planning process is. So when you're thinking about what you're going to do over the next 1, 2, or 3 months, what does that consist of? Well, obviously you are actually going to build features. That's one of the key goals of your team, is to build stuff that will deliver value to customers and ultimately your organization. But there's other stuff that you will have to do as well. You will have to make capacity available for doing architectural work. That means work to improve the performance or reliability or security of your software. And that's not usually considered to be a feature, although many people will argue, I believe correctly, that availability and security are in fact features. But often people don't think of them as features. That is real work with real outcomes that are important to users, so you have to make capacity for that work, even though often your business counterparts will not consider those features and will probably not consider that as part of your capacity. You have to think about that work as part of your planning process. It's absolutely critical. The third thing that you have to consider as a product manager is customer requests. You will hopefully be very closely connected to your customers, going and visiting them, creating spaces to gather feedback from them and to test hypotheses with them. And as a result of that, you will get a whole bunch of stuff that customers want you to do. And some of that stuff you will turn into features, absolutely. But some of it is stuff that you will just need to do because you want to make your customers happy and it's just a small thing. Those small things add up. You have to make capacity for those things. The other class of work that you'll typically need to think about is support work and operational work. Things like fixing bugs for customers, doing L3 support. Typically development teams are on the hook for doing L3 support work as well. So you need to make space for that. You might consider that customer requests. I just want to make it clear that this is a class of work in its own right. And the lines between these things are somewhat blurry, but I think it's important to break it out in this way so you can see that there's different kinds of work that you're going to have to plan for. A common metaphor for thinking about this is you're going to have a whole bunch of different sized bits of work, and you can think of it as fitting it into a bottle. Into a bottle you'll be able to put a few big things and a slightly larger number of smaller things, and then a bunch of little grains of sand that you can fit around things like fixing bugs for your customers. So that's one way to visualize what you're going to put into a release. However, there's one thing that is going to totally destroy this whole thing for you, and that is all the unplanned work that you're going to have to do. Things will go wrong. You will discover new things. Competitors will come out with features. Whole new classes of customers you didn't realize will have things that you didn't consider as key requests. Your environment will change. The economy will change. Disasters will happen. Oh my goodness. So you need to make capacity for those things that you're not expecting, because they will happen and they will destroy your plans. That's just the nature of innovation and life in general. So never allocate 100% of your capacity to the stuff that you are planning to happen, because then you will not have capacity for the things that you don't plan to happen. And what will happen is those things will destroy your plan, and then you won't be able to achieve your goals, and then everyone is going to be super frustrated. So it's important to consider unplanned work as part of your release planning process. Now, as I say, a lot of people think about release planning as you making a commitment. And the reason that people want to think of that process of making a commitment is because people love predictability. People love being able to say, we're going to deliver this stuff on this date. They want to make promises to their customers. We often see our competitors doing that. And so the point of the release planning process in many people's minds is being able to create certainty around certain outcomes and certain dates. And so the big question is the release planning process, as I've described it just now, going to ensure that we can get the things we want done in the time available? And the answer is no, it's not. You can never get certainty. The quest for certainty is a fool's errand, and very unfortunately, humans are not comfortable with uncertainty, and they don't like accepting uncertainty, and they will put in all kinds of work, including deluding themselves very strongly in order to try and grasp at this idea of certainty. So it's important to be clear up front with everybody, including yourself, that an effective release planning process is not about creating certainty. Fundamentally, as with everything in product management, it's about risk management. But in particular, what it's about is, as I say, that shared understanding that you're developing around what objectives we're trying to reach and what resources we're going to need to achieve those objectives, and whether we think it's reasonable to achieve them, and then assign priority to those outcomes and capacity and so forth. So it's okay that we can't get certainty out of the release planning process, because that's not what it's for. But you will see people coming in with this idea that, okay, now we've all committed to this, so that's what we're going to deliver, right? And you have to be very clear from the beginning, that's not the purpose of the release planning process. We're not going to get certainty. There is no magical release planning process that will give you certainty. What we're trying to do is create a shared understanding and become aligned on our strategy for the next 1, 2, 3 months, so that everyone is working in the same direction and we have an idea of what goals we're all trying to achieve and how we will know if we've achieved them.